So, imagine building a brand that's just so globally recognized that your company's name literally becomes synonymous with luxury.
Right, like the ultimate status symbol.
Exactly. You are the absolute gold standard in your industry. Everyone knows your logo, everyone wants your product, and, you can charge a massive premium for it.
Oh, for sure.
But then, when you actually look at your return on invested capital over the decades, your profitability is, well, it's virtually indistinguishable from a company making mundane, unbranded cardboard boxes.
It sounds like a paradox.
Yeah.
I mean, it really does.
Yeah.
But it's actually one of the most common realities in the corporate world.
Yeah, which is wild.
And it gets right to the heart of what we are pulling from today's sources, specifically the insights laid out in Competition Demystified by Bruce Greenwald and Judd Kahn.
Right.
What's fascinating here is that the authors argue that most executives fundamentally misunderstand what strategy actually is. They confuse operational efficiency, so running leaner, managing better, iterating products, with actual structural strategy.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because that distinction is exactly our mission for this deep dive today.
Absolutely.
If you've ever felt overwhelmed by just the sheer volume of business frameworks out there, or if you're trying to figure out why your company's incredible new product isn't translating into unassailable profits, well, the sources offer a pretty brutal but clarifying shortcut.
They really do. True strategy isn't about internal operations. It is entirely about managing your external competitors through one specific mechanism.
Right, barriers to entry.
Exactly.
Right.
If you strip away the jargon, a market without barriers to entry basically means anyone with capital can walk in and set up shop.
Which means no one is safe.
Right. If that's the case, you don't actually have a strategy. You are simply running on an operational treadmill. I mean, you can run faster than the person next to you for a little while, but eventually someone will catch up, or you're just going to get tired.
Yeah, that makes sense. So to step off that treadmill, we have to look at that automotive industry example you teased a moment ago.
Yes, let's get into that. Because it dismantles probably the most sacred piece of advice given to, well, every startup founder and marketing director out there.
Oh, you mean differentiate your product?
Exactly. Differentiate. The sources argue that differentiation without barriers to entry is just a complete illusion. Look at Mercedes-Benz, historically.
Right.
There was no product more successfully differentiated. I mean, it's a pure status symbol.
Wait, so being the Cadillac of something doesn't mean we're printing money. It's like having the coolest house on the block. But anyone can build an exact replica right next door.
That's a perfect analogy, because their economic performance has historically been shockingly average.
Wow. Really?
Yeah. The mechanism here is what's crucial. When Mercedes or Cadillac were pulling in these extraordinary profits in the post-war decades, those high returns function like a magnet.
Attracting everyone else.
Exactly, because there were no structural barriers preventing someone else from designing a high-end car. Competitors just flooded in. You had Jaguar, BMW, and eventually, Lexus and Acura.
But wait, those new entrants didn't destroy Mercedes by undercutting them on price, did they? I mean, a Lexus is still a very expensive car, so how does the trap actually spring on the incumbent?
It springs through market fragmentation and the completely unforgiving math of fixed costs.
Oh.
New competitors don't need to trigger a price war to ruin your margins. They just slice the pie into smaller pieces. Mercedes starts selling fewer cars because, well, some buyers now just prefer a BMW or a Lexus.
Right.
However, the fixed costs of maintaining that differentiation, the massive global advertising budgets, a relentless R&D to engineer better engines, the luxury dealership networks, those costs remain incredibly high.
So your numerator, the revenue, is shrinking because of lower volume, but your denominator, the fixed costs, stays exactly the same.
Exactly. Your fixed cost per vehicle skyrockets, your profit margin per vehicle collapses, and suddenly, you are fighting for survival.
That's brutal.
It really is. High returns always attract new entrants. If there is no structural barrier keeping them out, they will enter until those extraordinary profits are entirely competed away. It doesn't matter how strong your brand is.
Okay, so if differentiation is largely a myth in terms of protecting profits, what actually works? The text narrows genuine, sustainable competitive advantages down to just 3 structural pillars, right? Supply, demand, and economies of scale.
Yep, those are the 3.
Let's start with supply. I mean, this usually means proprietary technology or, privileged access to cheap raw materials, but the sources seem pretty dismissive of this one.
They are very dismissive. And that's because supply advantages are inherently fragile.
How so?
Well, if your entire moat is a technological edge, you're banking on the assumption that no one in the world is as smart as your engineers. And that's dangerous. Technology gets reverse engineered.
Right. Or key employees defect to rivals.
Exactly. Patents eventually expire. Even if you have an advantage today, the half-life of proprietary technology is just getting shorter every single year.
Which means we have to look outward, right, to the demand side.
Yeah.
Basically, how do you capture a customer so thoroughly that they simply won't leave, even if a competitor offers a slightly better or cheaper product?
That's the golden question. And the sources break customer captivity down into two main drivers: habit and switching costs.
The exploration of habit is super fascinating because it really hinges on consumer psychology.
Yeah.
The classic example in the text contrasts Coca-Cola with beer.
Oh yes, the cola wars.
Right. Cola drinkers exhibit intense customer captivity based on habit. We saw this famously in the 1980s when Coca-Cola tried to replace their classic formula with the sweeter new Coke.
Which is a massive flop.
Yeah.
Even though blind taste tests proved people actually preferred the taste of the new formula.
Exactly, because they weren't buying a flavor profile, right? They were buying a deeply ingrained automatic routine. The brain naturally seeks cognitive ease.
Yeah, makes sense.
When you purchase something frequently for a very low cost, your brain just offloads the decision-making process to pure habit to save energy. But then compare that to beer. A consumer who strictly drinks Budweiser at home will sit down at a Mexican restaurant and intuitively order a Corona.
Because the environment changed, which breaks the automatic routine.
Exactly. The new context prompts a conscious decision rather than a reflexive one. So habit only really functions as a barrier to entry for highly frequent, low-cost automatic purchases, like supermarket staples.
Which brings up a glaring issue for a massive portion of the economy.
Yeah. I mean, so what does this all mean for B2B companies that don't sell soda? If I'm selling B2B enterprise software or, I don't know, industrial machinery, my clients are absolutely not buying out of blind daily habit.
No, definitely not. In the B2B space, or with infrequent major purchases, you aren't relying on habit at all. You rely on search costs and switching costs.
Okay.
The core principle here is that complexity creates captivity. Consider Cisco's early dominance in the corporate router market. It wasn't that their underlying technology was this impenetrable secret that literally no one else could figure out.
It was because enterprise networking infrastructure is a terrifyingly complex house of cards.
Precisely. To install Cisco routers, an IT department had to spend months training their staff, earning specific Cisco certifications, and building their entire internal infrastructure around that proprietary system.
Oh, wow. So if I'm a rival hardware company and I walk into that IT director's office offering a router that is mathematically 15% faster and 10% cheaper, it just doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter at all. The IT director is going to look at your proposition and see nothing but career risk.
Right.
Think about it. The search cost of verifying your claims, the financial cost of retraining their entire staff, and the catastrophic risk of the network crashing during the transition. It makes switching completely irrational.
The complexity of the product locks the customer in. This perfectly illustrates how a SaaS company like Microsoft sustains its advantage too, right?
Absolutely. Microsoft Office and the Windows ecosystem represent staggering switching costs. Just imagine the pure capital destruction involved in retraining 50,000 global employees to use a completely different operating system.
Not to mention the file compatibility issues.
Oh yeah, it's a nightmare.
So let's do a quick mini summary of the framework so far. To have a real strategy, you need structural barriers. Supply advantages like patents decay quickly. Demand advantages are much stronger.
Right.
If you are B2C, you build that through high-frequency automatic habit. If you are B2B or SaaS, you build it by embedding yourself so deeply into your client's complex operations that the cost and risk of untangling from you far outweighs the benefit of a cheaper competitor.
Spot on. That covers supply and demand. But the third advantage, economies of scale, is where we see probably the most misunderstood concept in corporate strategy.
Really? How so?
Well, when you combine captive customers with economies of scale, you become nearly unassailable. However, the text introduces a really crucial caveat. Being a massive global behemoth does not actually give you an advantage.
Wait, that seems entirely counterintuitive. I mean, we are constantly told that scale is everything, that the biggest companies dominate because their size allows them to negotiate better prices and just absorb costs. Why wouldn't a global footprint be the ultimate advantage?
Because economies of scale only matter within the quote-unquote relevant market. It is all about local density, not absolute global size.
Okay, give me an example.
Let's look at a retail scenario. Compare a small, isolated town in Nebraska with a population of, say, 50,000 to the borough of Manhattan.
Okay.
The Nebraska town has enough consumer demand to support exactly one large discount retail store.
So if you are the first retailer to build a massive store there, you effectively establish a local monopoly.
You do, because your fixed costs,
Yeah.
the physical building, the local management, the localized advertising, all of that is spread across the entire available market.
Right.
If a competitor looks at that town, they will realize that splitting the market 50-50 means neither of you will generate enough revenue to cover those fixed costs. The math literally keeps them out.
Yeah. Ugh. But in Manhattan, the market is so vast that consumer demand can easily support a dozen massive retail stores.
Exactly. In Manhattan, multiple competitors can reach the scale required to cover their fixed costs. Your global size doesn't give you a relative advantage on that specific street corner.
You're just fighting trench warfare?
Yep, against other fully scaled competitors, and your profit margins will absolutely reflect that brutal competition.
Wow, this completely reframes the genius of Walmart's early expansion. Sam Walton didn't start out trying to battle established giants in massive cities.
Not at all. Walmart's foundational strategy was a masterclass in local economies of scale. They targeted small, overlooked towns in Arkansas and surrounding states.
Right.
They would build a distribution center and then place a dense ring of stores within a single day's drive of that hub.
Which means their inbound logistics costs per item were just fractions of a cent compared to a national chain trying to supply one isolated store in that same region.
Exactly. Their fixed costs for distribution and regional advertising were distributed over dozens of stores in a tight geographic radius. A competitor might have been 10 times larger nationally, but in that specific local market, Walmart had an impregnable relative cost advantage.
That's brilliant. Didn't Coors do the exact same thing?
They did, with beer in the regional West, before they ever attempted a national rollout.
But how does this concept of local scale apply to companies that don't have physical storefronts? If we are talking about the digital borderless economy, does local scale even exist for a software or internet company?
It absolutely does, but local translates to niche or specific network density.
Oh, I see.
For an internet company, dominating a highly specific vertical market provides the exact same barrier. Think about Amazon starting strictly with books.
That's right. They didn't sell everything at first.
No, they built impregnable scale in one specific vertical supplier relationships, warehouse optimization for that specific form factor, before they ever tried to sell electronics or clothing.
That perfectly transitions into what the sources call the growth trap, which honestly might be the most dangerous idea we cover today. If I'm understanding the mechanics correctly, a rapidly growing market like the explosion of the internet is actually terrible for maintaining economies of scale.
It is the enemy of economies of scale. If we connect this to the bigger picture, growth is actually the enemy. Scale advantages rely on fixed costs, representing a high percentage of the total market revenue.
Okay, walk me through that.
Let's do the math. Imagine a niche market that generates $10 million in total annual revenue. To compete in this market, you have to spend $2 million in fixed costs, say, developing the core software.
So an entrant has to capture a massive 20% of the entire market just to break even on their fixed costs. That's a huge, terrifying hurdle for a startup.
But what happens if that market suddenly explodes and grows to $100 million in total revenue? That $2 million fixed cost hasn't changed. It is now a trivial percentage of the total market.
Oh, wow. The hurdle basically vanishes. Now an entrant only needs to capture 2% of the market to break even.
Exactly. Suddenly, the ecosystem can support a dozen highly profitable competitors instead of just one. Big, rapidly expanding markets invite fierce competition.
Which completely upends the whole venture capital obsession with chasing massive, quote-unquote, total addressable markets.
It really does. Economically, you are far better off dominating a stagnant, boring, moderately sized market where the fixed cost hurdle keeps everyone else away.
This is wild. Let's turn this theory into an audit. Listeners are undoubtedly thinking about their own companies or, the companies they invest in, wondering if their perceived advantages are real or just illusions. So how do I know if I have real barriers?
The sources provide a two-step mathematical proof to determine if a structural moat actually exists. It's a highly objective checklist.
Okay, let's hear the checklist.
Step 1 is market share stability. You look at the industry landscape over a 5 to 10-year horizon. Do the top 3 or 4 players maintain relatively stable market share?
So like Coke and Pepsi.
Right, or Intel and AMD. Their shares fluctuate slightly, but the hierarchy is pretty entrenched.
Contrast that with the chaotic churn of the personal computer manufacturers in the 1990s. One year, Compaq was on top. The next year, it was Gateway, then Packard Bell.
Exactly. Constant turnover and market leadership is a mathematical guarantee that there are zero barriers to entry.
Okay, so that's step one. What's step two on the checklist?
Second step is evaluating the return on invested capital, or ROIC. Are the incumbent firms consistently sustaining 15 to 25% after-tax returns over a decade?
Because in a purely competitive market with no barriers, rivals will continually undercut prices until profits are driven down to the basic cost of capital, right?
Yeah.
Which usually hovers around, what, 6 to 8%?
Exactly. So if a company is consistently generating 20% returns year after year, and no new entrant has been able to steal their market share to diminish those returns, you're looking at a genuine structural barrier.
That is the mathematical proof of a real moat. But we also need to be vigilant about the illusions. The sources outline 5 clear signs of a false moat.
Yes. Strategies that executives pursue thinking they are building a fortress, when in reality they're just building a sandcastle.
Let's volley these back and forth. Let's explore those mechanisms. We've already covered the first one deeply. Number 1, relying purely on differentiation or brand equity. The Mercedes trap.
Right. You have a premium name, but no structural force preventing a rival from fragmenting your customer base and inflating your fixed costs per unit.
Exactly. What's number 2?
The second false moat is possessing large absolute size without local density. We touched on this with Walmart, but you see it constantly in telecommunications.
Oh, right. Like AT&T versus Verizon in the early local cellular markets.
Exactly. In the early days, AT&T had a massive national footprint. But in specific regional markets, local providers had denser tower networks.
Because having a massive national television advertising budget doesn't matter if your local cellular coverage is spotty compared to the regional player.
Exactly. Your absolute size provides zero relative advantage where the actual service is delivered.
Got it. Okay, the third false moat is the one we just dissected with the growth trap. Chasing rapid market growth under the assumption that a rising tide lifts all boats.
Right, when in reality that rising tide just dilutes your fixed cost advantages and lowers the drawbridge for well-funded competitors.
Okay, false moat number 4 is perhaps the most pervasive delusion in management. Relying purely on non-proprietary tech or operational efficiency alone.
Believing that your strategy is simply executing better or using off-the-shelf software to run leaner. I mean, operational excellence is absolutely vital for survival, but it is not a structural barrier.
Because it can be copied.
Precisely. Any process improvement, any workflow optimization can eventually be observed, copied, and deployed by a competent rival. It is a tactical necessity, but it is a temporary advantage.
Makes sense. And finally, the fifth false moat is having customer preference without actual switching costs or high-frequency habits.
Yes. Just because your clients genuinely like you or rate your service highly on a survey does not mean you have a moat. If it costs them absolutely nothing in terms of time, money, or operational risk to try the new competitor down the street.
Eventually they will.
Exactly. Eventually they will.
Which brings us to the most actionable part of this deep dive. If operational efficiency isn't a long-term strategy, and if relying on your brand is a trap, executives need to actively construct structural barriers.
Right. And for most businesses, the most accessible lever to pull is demand captivity.
So let's give you, the listener, a 7-day mini plan. Here's where it gets really interesting. If someone is evaluating their product roadmap or their client retention strategy this week, what are the 3 steps they can take to actively engineer those switching costs?
Okay, step 1 requires an immediate audit of your loyalty or retention programs. The goal is to reward cumulative loyalty, not simply distribute flat discounts.
Because a flat 10% discount is nothing more than a price cut. Any competitor can instantly match it.
Exactly. You need to engineer sunk costs. You structure the program so that the rewards accelerate exponentially with volume.
Like airline frequent flyer miles.
The perfect template. The closer a customer gets to that next elite tier, which promises free upgrades and lounge access, the more psychologically and mathematically painful it becomes to fly with the rival airline. You want your best customers to feel like they are abandoning a highly valuable asset if they leave.
Basically make the exit agonizing. Okay, what is step 2?
Step 2, integrate and complicate. You need to identify ways to add interlocking features to your core product. Think about how retail banks continuously push customers to set up direct deposit, automated bill pay, and linked investment accounts.
Like Microsoft adding features to Windows. They aren't just offering convenience, they are deliberately weaving their service into the nervous system of your life.
Exactly. Once all your bills are automated through their platform, the administrative nightmare of moving your accounts to a new bank becomes a massive switching cost. You want your product or service to become so deeply embedded in the customer's daily workflow that untangling from it requires systemic disruption.
Wow, that is powerful. And finally, step 3.
Step 3, raise the stakes of switching.
This sounds particularly vital for B2B or specialized consulting and service industries like medicine.
Oh, absolutely. In those fields, you must consciously manage the narrative around risk. You highlight the immense search costs involved in finding a reliable alternative.
Right.
You subtly but clearly emphasize the potential disasters, the steep learning curves, and the operational downtime associated with transitioning to an unproven competitor.
You're actively reminding them that they aren't just purchasing your service.
No, they are purchasing the safety of the known against the terrifying, career-threatening risk of the unknown.
That completely reframes how you write a proposal or pitch a renewal. You aren't just selling your features, you are illuminating the hidden costs of leaving.
Exactly.
Well, this has been a massive paradigm shift. We've torn down the myth that a great brand and operational hustle are enough to protect a business. We've redefined strategy not as a set of internal goals, but as the active construction of structural barriers.
Right. Protecting your margins through captive demand and dense, localized scale.
Because if you lack these structural advantages, your only viable option is to keep your head down and relentlessly out-operate everyone on a completely level, exhausting playing field.
Which is not where you want to be. And this raises an important question for you to mull over as you analyze your own work this week.
Let's hear it.
Look closely at the most profitable segment of your business right now. Examine the specific product or service that generates your highest margins. Are you actually protected by a structural barrier to entry?
Or have you simply been lucky that a well-funded, highly competent competitor hasn't noticed your profit margins yet?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because if it is just luck, and you are relying on brand preference without a real moat, the clock is ticking.
A very sobering thought to leave on, but exactly why we do these deep dives. Thank you for joining us today. Take these frameworks, look at every business you interact with today, and ask, are they an elephant or an ant? We'll catch you on the next one.